Hello, I'm Craig, and welcome to another episode of Football Kit Memories, the football podcast that gets under the shirt. Today, I meet the deputy editor of When Saturday Comes, Mr. Tom Hocking. During our chat, we talked about the magazine that's run for 35 years, its iconic look and feel, and the ways in which it's remained true to its roots as a very much for the fans, by the fans style publication. Later, I asked Tom to pick 3 of his favourite football shirts and tell me a little bit about what they mean to him. We find out what Salvador Dali and an English sleeping giant have in common, what trips to Bootham Crescent were like in the 90s, and we finish a little further afield in Japan. Remember, you can listen to this and other episodes of Football Kit Memories on all major audio platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please do like, follow, share, but above all, please do enjoy the podcast. So today on the podcast, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the deputy editor of When Saturday Comes magazine. It's Tom Hocking. How are you doing, Tom?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much, mate. Really excited to talk to you about When Saturday Comes. I'm a long-term reader.
Good. That's always nice to hear. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's always fun to talk about football kits. So
fantastic. Yeah. So look, you guys very humbly brand yourselves as the half-decent football magazine, but you've been around since 1986. What do you think the key to the longevity has been?
Yeah, I mean, so the magazine launched it in 1986, a year before I was born. So it's been edited. It was originally founded by the current editor Andy Lyons and his co-founder and the original editor Mike Tisher, and they met in a record store and talked a lot about football. And it was at a time when football really wasn't. It's hard to imagine now, but football really wasn't talked about a lot in the mainstream media. Certainly not fan culture elements. Fans were pretty much seen as hooligans, or football was sort of pushed to the side. And they launched it because they were having these conversations in the record shop about football, and they decided some of it might be nice written down. And there was a real sort of DIY fanzine movement around music at the time. And they launched it, and it grew from there. I guess the key to longevity, sort of 35 years later, is that it's stayed consistent, and obviously it has developed. You know, it's got color. It's no longer just sort of hand photocopied and stapled. You know, we have moved into the 21st century in that respect. But it's stayed sort of true to the reasons it began in 1986, which is to give a voice to sort of fans and to fan issues, and to really look at football in general, and that it was founded sort of with the principle that there's more that unites fans than divides them. And while rivalries are a huge part of football, ultimately we just all really enjoy going to football matches, and I think that has stayed the same. And largely fans are ignored, and they were ignored in a very different way in the late 1980s than they are now. You know, with the various Premier League shenanigans and European Super League stuff that goes on. You know, the last people to be thought of are the fans, and you know that, if anything, has stayed consistent in football throughout all the time. And so sort of WSC has stayed true to its roots of talking about football in a way that it really doesn't matter whether you're going to watch Manchester United and Liverpool and Man City, or you're going to watch Macclesfield, or you're going to watch Hallam FC, my local non-league team, or anyone like that. You know, the experiences are all shared and very similar in terms of fan culture and routines, bits. Fans enjoy different parts of it. For some people it's about routine and going with family, some people it's about meeting up with friends, some people it's about just a purely sort of individual pursuit. Like it's sort of, you get individual ground hoppers going around. It's very different, but the whole thing that unites us is that act of going to matches. We always say that sort of a typical WSC reader, and it's not the case for everyone, but a typical WSC reader goes to matches. And I know that sounds quite odd, because obviously it's football, you want to go to matches, but I think a lot of that there are a lot of football fans out there who maybe don't go to football matches as particularly regularly. But I think if you do, you understand, you see the same things no matter what level you're going to watch. You could go to watch a Premier League game or a non-league game, and you do see the same routine, the same characters. So sort of WSC has always tried to serve everyone in that respect, in terms of sort of being about match going. And as I say, stay consistent on issues such as ticket prices and fans' rights, and that fans really hold the key to the game, not necessarily sort of chairman or even players. They're all transient. They all move on, whereas fan bases really don't. So yeah, that's, I'd say, where it's sort of the longevity comes from.
Yeah. Do you know, you mentioned the fan stuff. One of the things I really like about the magazine is the way it kind of captures that experience, like you say, especially through its kind of photos element as well that you use in the magazine. And obviously, you run separate social accounts that show those amazing images captured at matches. Obviously, we haven't had that for a long time as such, but just coming back off of COVID and fans are back, I always think that there's something really special about those photos that you guys do share in terms of like you can smell the grass and you can smell the chips and the burgers and stuff like that. There's a real kind of a feeling of fandom, like you say.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's that I wouldn't take credit for that. That is definitely down to sort of we've got a wonderful team of freelance photographers, that are ridiculously talented at sort of capturing that. So sort of the main three would be Colin McPherson, Simon Gill, and Paul Thompson, who are all located sort of at various parts of the country. So it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of which games to cover.
Nice.
And then we do also have some other photographers we work with. David Balcombe is one who we use occasionally as well, who's very good. And they have this real knack of picking out not necessarily the action, but the sort of the action goes on in the background to someone pouring too much salt on chips, or seagulls coming in to pick off the sort of the remnants of the pies that have been discarded, and sort of really capture the emotion on people's faces during a football match is something that most fans don't really get to see because you're concentrating on the game. So I always think they've got a real talent, that our photographers, of spinning those cameras around where everyone else is focused in on the action on the pitch. They turn it around and really show the emotion of what it's like watching it, and not just for fans. Also, you get different emotions of officials up in the director's box, particularly non-league. There's some real club people who dedicate their lives at non-league to helping this club, and then have to go through the same emotions that fans go through watching their teams win or quite often lose. And and that is some of the best things about working at WSC, is sort of the part of the production of the magazine where those images come in from Colin and Paul and Simon, and getting to flick through them, and then our designers obviously get a lovely job of choosing which ones go in, and it's very difficult sometimes, and that's sort of why we launched. We've got photos.wsc.co.uk, which is sort of a dedicated archive of our photography from the past. I don't quite know how far it goes back, maybe 15 years, maybe 20. Wow. And it's great. And we do sell prints as well of some of the photos that we're allowed to sell. Obviously licensing issues notwithstanding for Football League and Premier League games. But it really is a really special part of the magazine, and sort of using those sort of independent photographers, it's really important to us. It would be very easy to just get agency pictures, and sometimes we do have to use agency pictures if we can't get a photographer in, particularly during COVID. There's limited amounts of space for photography, for photographers to get into ground, so sometimes we do have to use agency pictures, but even then we're looking for something that's just slightly different. We don't necessarily want the same goal celebration that every other outlet is using, really, as good as that photo might be. We just want something a bit different. That's why we love it, really. That's why we love doing the job that we do, because we get to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, that's really important. I think like the magazine has kind of retained as well this really, I'd say, like idiosyncratic look as well. I don't know whether that's because it was kind of born out of the fanzine movement, but things like your illustrations and often sometimes like the images you use of players are very kind of cut and paste as well, and it's kind of retained that look and feel for a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of a conscious decision. There's all the technology is available to us, that is available to the major newspapers and maybe glossier magazines, but we're not particularly interested in it. This is its heart. It still is a fanzine. We say on the front, it's a half decent football magazine. And we sort of, they had to do that to get into WH Smith's. WH Smith's originally, when they were talking about first go on sale,
Yeah.
WH Smith's wanted something that said football on the front, because they thought when Saturday comes wouldn't mean anything. So grudgingly, Andy and Mike decided to go with the half decent football magazine on the cover. But at its heart, it remains a fanzine. And sort of a platform for, of course, lots of journalists have written for us and gone on to bigger things. But it's also, we've got a lot of writers that have just are still amateur writers and just wonderful writers, but it's not their main job, and that's fine too. And they can all sit next to each other on a page. And we would never particularly want the design to go too glossy. Obviously, we went full color a long time ago, and that was quite a big deal. But at the time, but yeah, we've worked with illustrators. Sort of Tim Bradford has been illustrating for a very long time for us. Dave Robinson, who did the Euro 2020 wall chart and has done every wall chart, I think, back to 1990.
Oh, wow.
6 maybe, or maybe 98. I might be getting that wrong. And he's wonderful, and he still sends in. He still does it. It's all done by hand, and he sends in the different layers by hand, scans them in. Having done it, it's not all done on the computer, and I think that's really important. I also think it's important that we remain a printed magazine. We've never had much interest in going. Sometimes it's a challenging marketplace, obviously, and the WSC has stood the test of time mainly because of its loyal subscribers that have stuck with us through sort of good sales periods and bad sales periods. We've always had that wonderful subscription base to rely on. And they like it, and they've subscribed for such a long time because it has evolved, but it hasn't really changed at its heart, and that is, that's sort of, we'd never want to move away from that by going sort of digital only or anything like that. There's something so nice, and it's particularly come to the fore during lockdown, actually, is that there's something special about sitting back and reading a printed magazine, or going to the pub or a coffee shop or wherever you want to, and just sitting in the corner and reading a magazine with a drink, or just finding some quiet time at home, or on public transport. It's very different to sort of constantly scrolling news if you're looking at sort of Twitter and things like that. So it's very much in the same way that vinyl has become sort of, it disappeared. It seemed to have been overtaken, and it's come back, and it's maybe not as prevalent as it used to be, but it's definitely still got a market out there, and is for real collectors and people who just want to sort of experience something physical with and spend a bit of time. They're willing to spend a bit of their time doing that. And I think that's the same with magazines as well. People are perhaps a bit pickier about how many they won't subscribe to sort of 10, 20 magazines anymore, which perhaps they would used to. They'll pick one or two, but the important thing is if you stay consistent, we remain one of those one or two.
Exactly. Well, it's that indulgent moment, isn't it? Like, putting on a record and just not having to skip the tracks. You can kind of engage with it in a different way. And a magazine, I think, is very much the same kind of format. Than, as you say, scrolling through Twitter endlessly, rereading the same kind of retweeted articles, I guess.
Exactly that. It's a different pace of life, and that is that is needed, I think, sometimes, and thankfully we're still out there, available for people to sort of take that time, really. So yeah, it's lovely to keep making it, yeah, and to sort of, as you say, we've been working with the same illustrators and the sort of photographers for a long time, and we're always interested in new people as well. But
Yeah.
we never want to change the feel too much.
So print remains really key to the kind of business model and the brand, but you have kind of diversified a little bit, right? So there are live events that you're doing. There's been a couple so far, right?
Yeah, so obviously, the print magazine remains central to everything we do. It's always the most important thing. It's always we've got to get that next magazine out. But obviously, we're not completely stuck in the past. We're aware that there are other mediums for people to follow us on. So we just over a year ago now, maybe late November 2019, I think it was, we launched a podcast, which which is sort of our editor Andy, and Harry Pearson, one of a writer who started out writing for us, went on to write for The Guardian, and he writes a lot of for a lot of travel magazines, and he now has a column with us as well.
Okay.
And it's hosted by Daniel Gray, who's another brilliant writer.
Yeah.
Harry and Dan are both Middlesbrough fans, so there's a bit
Right.
of Middlesbrough chat on there, but they try to keep it to a minimum.
Yeah.
So we launched that. Late 2019, which is going really well, and we've since lockdown happened, we started to do some live events.
Yeah.
So we did one specifically about football grounds with Simon Inglis, who's sort of I'm sure your listeners will know that he's sort of a key guy in the sort of football stadiums world. Him and also Mike Bailey, who's just released a book about stadiums, and our own Fionn Thomas, who's the assistant editor of WSC and also has a PhD in football stadiums. So,
Wow.
so there you go. So
Wow.
that was the first one, and then the second one we did a Euros event with Josh Widdicombe, Ellis James, and Sean McGuigan. So,
Nice.
which wanted to represent all the home nations
Yes.
with that one. So that's a bit of a departure. But again, someone like Josh Widdicombe obviously gone on to be a big comedian, but did work at WSC sort of early in his career before he decided to be a comedian.
Really?
And he's a Plymouth Argyle fan. So, and he obviously does a podcast called Quickly Kevin.
Yes.
So he's sort of a good fit. So we started doing those events on Zoom, partly because we wanted to do them originally. We were planning to do live events in person, and we might still do that at some point. We have to sort of see how restrictions go and if the interest remains. But Zoom kind of made it easier because we've got readers all over the country and all around the world. So Zoom made it easier to be able to access them all at once and give them all an opportunity. And we wanted to give something extra back to the people who joined us on Patreon as well. We've got a supporters club on Patreon, which is a chance for people to most of the people on there are subscribers to the magazine already, and it's a chance for them to sort of give something a bit extra to us to sort of keep the magazine going, and also they get extra in terms of extra podcast episodes and either free or discounted live events depending on the tier that they're members of. So yeah, there's a lot going on really, but sort of at the core of it is the physical magazine, and that will always be our sort of number one priority. Yeah.
So how long have you been with the magazine, Tom?
So coming up to 10 years actually, which is is crazy to think about. So I did a master's in magazine journalism at Sheffield Uni, and did a bit of work experience as part of that, and one of them was sort of 2 weeks at WSC, which I'd been reading for a few years, and was also happened to be on sale in the university shop, the student union shop, which was great. So I was really interested in it. Got a couple of weeks of work experience, and while I was there, it was mentioned that the news editor at the time, called Ed, was moving to New York and leaving, and it's a very small company. There's only 4 of us full time.
Right.
Furlough notwithstanding, current circumstances notwithstanding, but there's 4 full-time members of staff. So I figured there'd be sort of an entry-level job coming up in a few months, and sort of kept my eye on it, and there was, and so I joined as I thankfully got the job as publishing assistant, which is the glamorous world of sort of dealing with subscription queries, a lot of changes of address, a lot of t-shirt folding, because we sort of sell t-shirts. One of my first jobs, I'm pretty sure, was folding up Stuff Your Super League t-shirt size, which we've now had to reprint for the 4th time because it just keeps coming back. So yeah, that was sort of my entry into the world, really. A world of sort of sports journalism was folding t-shirts for WSC, and I absolutely loved it. And it's I've never really wanted to leave since, because why would you? Because it's you know, I've moved up. I was moved up to news editor, and then they changed title to deputy editor a while ago. And yeah, it's just it doesn't really matter what your title is at WSC either. Like we all sort of do the same jobs, you know, like everyone at the magazine has folded t-shirts for hours on end, and you know, folded renewal letters and sent them out. And at Christmas, and you know, like busy times at Christmas, we've all had to pack post, and that is just how it is running a small business, which is essentially what we do. You know, as I say, there's only 4 of us full time, and then a couple of freelance designers come in for the busy time of sort of magazine production time. But you're always juggling we would never want to sort of outsource subscriptions or anything like that, because we like talking to our readers. We like that they can call up and change their address or email, and you know, they talk to us. They don't, you know, one of the 4 of us, there really isn't that many options for them to talk to. So yeah, we really like that small thing, a small sort of way of running, and I just love it.
So you maintain that kind of startup mentality then, despite the popularity and the success, it's still the same kind of core people. That's really interesting.
Yeah, as I say, like the editor is still Andy Lyons, who has been Mike Tisher was the original editor, though Andy was working on it as well. Andy was the co-founder, and Mike moved to Australia, and Andy took over and has been the editor ever since. You know, and that core of sort of DIY independent. We remain independent. We don't answer to sort of big publishing houses, which has its advantages, which means we can sort of take decisions like none of us felt comfortable taking gambling advertising anymore. So we just stopped taking gambling advertising. We didn't have to go through executives or anything like that. You know, we had to sort of higher up the food chain of a magazine company. We just said, well, we don't feel comfortable taking them anymore. We don't feel we can comment on gambling's prevalence in football, while also taking gambling ads. So we stopped. And obviously we have to weigh up the financial implications of something like that. But ultimately, we just decided it was the right thing to do, and we could. So that's an advantage of being an independent magazine. Disadvantage, obviously, is everything costs a bit more because you're not getting bulk discounts on paper or anything like that. But you know, it is what it is, and we're mostly funded by our readers these days. There's very little advertising in the magazine, so we sort of live or die by our readership, and if that ever deserts us, we'll stop. But they haven't so far, so we're going to keep going, and that's kind of the attitude, really.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So before we do talk a bit more about your relationship with football, Tom, through your football shirt choices, I wanted to ask you about. It's probably my favourite ever article from the magazine, and it resurfaces every so often on Twitter, and it's nice to read it again. But it is a book review of Tim Lovejoy's autobiography, and the title of the article is called "No Love and No Joy," and it's particularly scathing. And I just wanted to ask you, obviously that kind of pops up now and again. Has there ever been any, has he ever got in touch about it? Have you ever spoke to him about it, or has there ever been any fallout about it?
No, so that article was written by Taylor Parks, who is a wonderful writer about football and about music and culture. He sort of there was a lot of crossover in the early days of sort of football magazines and fanzines and with music. And sort of Taylor came from the melody maker sort of type of writer. And yeah, I mean, Tim Lovejoy has blocked us on Twitter, which we only discovered fairly recently, actually, because we don't check his Twitter account particularly often. We found it when someone else someone else tagged him after, again, the article had resurfaced on Twitter, because that's just what it does. No, I don't think so. I mean, supposedly we did last year we had our 400th issue, and we did a sort of special podcast around that, sort of 2 episodes talking to writers, and one of them was Taylor. Obviously we asked him about sort of his feelings towards that review, and obviously we find it quite funny. We bring it back up on World Book Day and stuff like that, but he feels sort of it was almost too easy. He sort of says in the podcast it was almost too easy, and he feels it's not his best piece of writing, although it's perhaps his best known piece of writing, as is often the case. And it's sort of one of those things. Someone on we have a sort of a message board called One Touch Football, which is from sort of very early days of football, of sort of football online, and someone mentioned on there that the Lovejoy review feels kind of like a sort of a classic rock band who have constantly being asked to play the same song, same sort of hit, despite the rest of their sort of repertoire actually also being quite good. It's sort of the one thing that they're really known for. And that's fine. As I say, we don't mind it. It gets a bit of publicity around World Book Day and stuff, and it always resurfaces. But like no kickback. He just, we live in different worlds, and that's fine. We're happy in our world, and I'm sure he's happy in his. So
of course.
It's, as I say, he blocks us on Twitter, which I totally understand, because it must be annoying constantly seeing a bad review of your book. But he shouldn't write the book that's that bad, should he? Really.
So if when Saturday comes is the Rolling Stones, that article is "You'll Give Me Shelter," then basically.
That sort of thing. I think it's we don't mind it. Obviously, it's nice. It's quite interesting actually, that article. A lot of people don't know this. So when it first appeared in the magazine, it was the illustration was by David Squires, who has now gone on to sort of do cartoons for the Guardian and things like that. But he was someone who, I don't know if we were his first illustrated commission, but we were quite early in his career. So that's always nice. And there's an accompanying article which you can see our entire sort of back catalogue is on our archive, sort of the digital versions of them. There's a really good accompanying article by Cameron Carter, I think it is, about I can't remember what I think it might be James Corden show or something like that. Taylor also did a good takedown of James Corden's World Cup show, but Cameron mentions there was another sort of TV show around at the same time as Lovejoy's book was around, that sort of similar vibes. And it's always good. It's always interesting to look back, because no one remembers those sort of snippets. They just remember the sort of lines, "I hope it makes you sick," and things like that, which are great. And it continues to go viral, and that's great. Good for everyone who's still enjoying it. It's nice to know people still enjoy reading it.
Right, mate. Let's talk about some football shirts. The first question I ask everybody on the podcast is, what do football shirts mean to you?
Well, I guess to me each shirt means something slightly different, but I don't tend to wear them to matches anymore. I tend to wear them, obviously, when I'm playing football, sort of five-a-side or something like that. It's very much sort of stopped wearing them to matches when I got to my teenage years, really. I think I tend to wear them around the house or to the shops or something like that these days. And I think now, for me, they're quite a nostalgic thing. I'm much more interested in sort of shirts that I had as a kid and loved, and maybe, obviously, I can't wear the same shirt because it's much too small for me these days. But sort of trying to rebuy those on eBay is always a lot of fun. So in that respect, it's quite a nostalgic thing. And I think that'll be the same for kids growing up now, that like they will love the kits that they wore as a kid. I might not necessarily like design, although there are some better kit designs. I think we went through a bit of a malaise of sort of templated kits, and I think some of the bigger companies are now realizing that while that might be cheaper to produce, it's perhaps not the most striking, especially in a social media world where you can go, you know, you can get a lot of attention for doing something a bit different. But yeah, to me, it's about, as we'll come on to with my choices, sort of the team I support wasn't necessarily worn by a lot of people where I lived. So I was always a bit of the odd one out. Which was always interesting. So I support Sheffield Wednesday, but I grew up in, I was born in Sheffield, but I moved to York when I was very little. And as I sort of, I'll come on to discuss, like while Wednesday were a big club in the early 90s, they really weren't sort of as widely sort of supported as you know, Liverpool, Leeds, Man United back in York. That was who everyone else supported. So I tended to be the only one at sort of football practice when I was, you know, under 10s or whatever, wearing a Sheffield Wednesday shirt, and it would always be quite exciting to see someone else or meet someone else who sort of knew who they were properly and supported them or followed them, despite us actually being quite good at that point.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then it's sort of, to me, so to me, it's quite an odd thing, sort of wearing a football shirt. I'm not used to. I live back in Sheffield now, and I'm not used to seeing so many Sheffield Wednesday shirts, because I grew up in York and then went to Sheffield for uni, and then moved down to London for sort of 8 years. I lived there, and obviously you don't see that many Wednesday shirts down there. So it's always quite a thrill when you see a shirt that you know you can bond with, and you know that you can talk to that person about football. So that's always nice, and sort of, I guess it also brings a lot of nostalgia in terms of like shirt spotting when you're on holiday. Sort of counting up. Always used to do a thing where we used to go to holiday in Cornwall a lot when I was younger. Always used to do a thing of trying to see, you know, hopefully you'd see more Sheffield Wednesday shirts than you'd see Sheffield United or something like that. And I sort of always had a tally going in my head. So it's that kind of instant recognition.
Yeah.
And I can't help but sort of point out now, like, you know, whenever you go past, you sort of try and work out what the shirt is, even if you can only see, you know, someone's got a jacket slightly open and you can't quite see the badge, so you're trying to work it out from the colours. But it's that instant recognizability, I think, of a shirt, and sort of the excitement and the knowledge that perhaps they share your views on football.
Yeah, of course. So, mate, you mentioned Wednesday. Wednesday is your first choice. It's the Sheffield Wednesday home shirt between 2000 and 2001 by Puma.
Yeah, so I think it's always interesting, isn't it? Because kits tend to be seen as sort of classic shirts if they've accompanied sort of a successful period in the club's history.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, it would have been very easy for me to go for like the early 90s Wednesday shirts, you know, made by Umbro, or even Puma took over from Umbro in sort of 93, 94, I think.
Okay.
About a year after we got to and lost both cup finals.
Yes.
So they're sort of seen as the classic Sheffield Wednesday shirts. And I think this shirt from 2000, 2001 possibly would be a cult classic, bit of a cult classic, but it was worn by an absolutely terrible bunch of players. So it was the shirt sort of the season after relegation from the Premier League.
Right.
Which came as a real shock to me, you know, like I'd grown up in the 90s with sort of Wednesday being genuinely one of the most exciting teams to watch, and certainly up until sort of maybe 97, and then the decline started properly.
Yeah.
So it was a real shock to me that for us to be relegated. I was too young to sort of really understand the relegation in sort of 1990. I was only sort of 3 years old, so I didn't understand the football pyramid system, which is disgraceful. My parents should have taught me that much earlier. But yeah, so it was my first sort of experience of Wednesday, really, really difficult period, and it's not been great since then.
Of course.
But sort of they came down they got relegated in 2000. So this 2001 shirt, season after relegation, there was a lot of sort of optimism around the club that we were going to bounce straight back and it would be really easy. And we'd appointed a new up and coming sort of quite exciting manager in Paul Jewell, who we poached from Bradford. And we'd managed to retain players like Gerald Sibon, who we really thought would just waltz through what was Division 1 at the time, called Division 1 at the time. And it's sort of a running joke that Premier League return season tickets were sort of marketed. Get your season ticket for the Premier League return. And it's constantly a running joke of, God, has anyone still got those? I wonder if they'd still honour it. 20 years later.
Wow.
So it was really quite exciting. It was quite an exciting time. A lot of different grounds. Wednesday had been in the Premier League for 10 years and been mid-table for the last few, or struggling against relegation. So it was, new grounds. It was exciting to play against Sheffield United again. There was sort of a lot of optimism going into the season. Puma released this new kit, and I think it's got all the makings of what should be a classic Sheffield Wednesday kit in many ways. So it's got quite broad blue and white stripes. It's got 5 stripes with a central one being blue, which is always, I think, really important for a Wednesday shirt. I don't like it when the central stripe is white. I prefer it when it's blue.
Yeah.
And sort of the broad 5 stripes is very similar to sort of the layout that it had for those classic kits in the early 90s as well. It also had like a really smart black collar, which I always think looks good. I quite like a collar on a football shirt.
Yeah.
It had black shorts and blue socks with black trim, which is, again, it's my preferred Wednesday kit, really. A lot of Wednesday fans are split. Some would like blue shorts. The 1994 kit had blue shorts, which was a lovely kit, but I personally prefer black shorts. And it had really nice yellow piping, sort of around the edges. And obviously the big thing about this shirt is it was sort of dominated by this Chupa Chops logo.
I love it.
Sort of the lolly maker, sweet maker. And it was supposedly sort of Wednesday's biggest sponsorship deal that they'd ever signed.
Wow.
Probably still is, given that we've only gone downwards since from this point, really. So I can't imagine we've signed a bigger one. And like it's a very the Chupa Chops logo is quite flowery, but it's designed by Salvador Dali.
I was going to say.
So like how many other clubs can claim to have like a Dali design on their shirts? And I did some research because I wrote about this shirt in WSC. We've got a regular shirt column. I wrote about it last year sometime. I did some research, and I think the answer to that is none. I can't see anyone else who was ever sponsored by Chupa Chups, although if your listeners know of anyone, please let me know. And he didn't really do much other stuff that would, I imagine, have found its way onto a football shirt. So yes, it's a bit of a controversial design because it's this flowery logo, but it is just this incredible surrealist artist who's designed it. So I think if we'd had a good season and we'd bounced straight back, this could have been like a modern day cult favorite, possibly the best one since those early 90s ones. But in 13 seconds into our first match of the season at Wolves, Kevin Pressman got sent off. And it didn't really get much better. So we won one of our first 12 games, including 8 defeats in a row, 5-0 at home to Wimbledon. We had an absolutely awful season. It wasn't the return that we'd expected, and we ended up finishing 17th, place below Barnsley. 1 above Grimsby, 2 above Stockport. Like it certainly wasn't a classic season. Really, there was only the League Cup was the only real highlight of that season. We beat Sheffield. It was the first time we'd played Sheffield United in a long time. We beat them in the 3rd round of the League Cup. F and a Cuckoo scored in extra time. Wow. I think so. Yeah, that was a highlight, and we got to the quarterfinal of the League Cup and lost to Birmingham.
Right.
But really, it was such a bleak season that it instead of it being a classic shirt, it sort of the logo made it quite an easy target.
Yeah.
So like I remember like there's a lot of match reports where where Wednesday would take a licking and things like that, because it's just sort of really easy stuff for sort of especially tabloid journalists to poke fun at. And unfortunately, chupper apparently translates as suck.
Right.
In Spanish, and is often used as a slang term for a sexual act,
I see.
which sort of delighted rival fans, and you can imagine how fun they had as we sort of slipped down the leagues. Yeah, so sort of 2 decades on from this, sort of Premier League return tickets are a running joke, and it's sort of more likely to be Championship return tickets these days.
Yeah.
You know, and we were relegated again in 2003, still wearing, there was still Chupa Chops as the sponsor,
Yeah.
but it was quite nice kit, actually, much thinner stripes by Diodora. So
Okay.
we'd sort of started to slip down the kit manufacturers
Oh.
list as well, from Puma to Diodora, and we went through various other ones I can't remember, that, you know, just really aren't classic shirts.
Yeah.
Let me have a
You were making it
just
yourself for a little while as well, weren't you, if I remember correctly?
we still are making it ourselves,
Oh,
actually.
right.
Well, in theory, via a sort of a company that our chairman has set up called Elevate.
Sounds
So
shady.
where we supposedly make our own kits, and supposedly that we thought that would make it cheaper, but in fact they're the most expensive, or they were the most expensive kits in the division. So
Wow.
not we're not particularly impressed with Elevate, let's say.
Right. Interesting.
Lotto. So it went Diodora, Lotto, and then we had Puma back for a couple of years, Sondico, and then Elevate, our own brand. So that's, you know, we've sort of, as we've declined and sort of become forgotten among the sort of elite of the English football, so has our kit manufacturer declined. Yeah, so it's, you know, it's one of those. If purely on shirt basis, I love this shirt. I get that the Chupa Chups logo isn't for anyone, but I personally really like it, and I think it's really interesting and unique. You know, it's not the sort of thing that has been repeated, as far as I can tell, anywhere, the Chupa Chups logo sponsorship.
Yeah.
So for me, as a purely for a shirt, the only thing I'd change about it would be to have the old classic owl badge. This one has a shield around it,
Yeah.
which I don't like. I prefer it when it was just the owl itself. It was very simple and clean.
Yeah.
But other than that, I genuinely love this shirt on its own. It just brings back horrible memories of watching really bad players sort of slip down the league with disappointment. You know, like we had sort of our great hope sort of in the late 90s was Richie Humphreys came through in sort of 96, 97, I think it was. And
Right.
this season, I think he moved to Cambridge United after not fulfilling his potential. And you could just see the decline in the club as sort of overpaid players underperformed, which is very similar to what just happened in the current season, to be honest. But the less said about that, the better.
I see. Well, you know, football is cyclical, and the fan base is there, so hopefully we'll see them back in.
Yeah, you'd have thought so. I mean, one thing, this is the longest we've, I think, ever been out of the top flight, and this is the third time in recent memory that we've been relegated to League One, or the equivalent, or third tier. So this is arguably, some people would argue who were there that it was possibly worse in the 70s, but I think statistically this is our worst period in our history. So hopefully we'll get back at some point. I don't have confidence it'll be starting next season.
Yeah.
But there you go. It happens, and I still enjoy going. So
nice. Well, that's what it's all about, mate. So let's move on to your second choice. This is the York City away shirt 92 to 93 by a brand called Cavendish Sports. Is that right?
Yeah. So apparently so. So recently I was clearing out my sort of childhood bedroom, or the remnant of my childhood bedroom, because my parents were moving house.
Right.
And I sort of found all my childhood football shirts, and this was in it. And as I said earlier, I moved from Sheffield to York when I was very young. So I was born in 1987, so I was only sort of 5 or 6 when I moved to York. and this is, as far as I can tell, if the first York shirt that I owned.
Right.
Which, because having, from all the ones I found when clearing out my childhood bedroom, this was the oldest one I could find.
Okay.
So Sheffield Wednesday were always my main team, having been born in Sheffield. But when I moved to York, I was so young that they've always been really sort of important to me as well, but in a slightly different way. So because I didn't live in Sheffield, I didn't have any Wednesday supporting friends. There was no one else at football training wearing a Wednesday shirt. And I would always go to matches. I always had a season ticket, but I'd go with my dad, and it was very much a sort of father-son thing of, on a Saturday we'd go to the match, we'd get in the car, we'd go to Hillsborough, we'd watch the match, and we'd come home, and it was that was very much the routine. Same seats every week, friends with the person next to us, but I didn't really have anyone at school or anything like that to talk to about sort of Sheffield Wednesday, even though, as I say, they were arguably quite a top club in the 90s. And for me, York City were completely the opposite. So when Wednesday were away, or we weren't going for whatever reason, they were playing on a different day, I'd often go to York City with school friends and sort of their families. And most of those friends also supported, say, Liverpool or Leeds, as you'd expect in York. But we'd all go together to very few of them actually went to watch their own teams. They didn't go have season tickets or anything like that at Ellen Road or Anfield. So we would all go and watch York instead. It's actually the only Bootham Crescent is the only stadium I can think of where I've watched a game from every stand, including the away end, which I haven't done at Hillsborough actually. I've never sat on the cop at Hillsborough, but for some reason, I don't know how I've missed that. I have to fix that. But yeah, including so I've been at Bootham Crescent as an away fan for Wednesday. But York were a much bigger part of my life in terms of, I had birthday parties at Bootham Crescent. I didn't have them at Hillsborough, I was too far away, so I had them at Bootham Crescent. I first caught, like catching a football in the crowd. I've only ever done that at Bootham Crescent, not at Hillsborough, because Hillsborough's too big. It just doesn't happen at Bootham Crescent. That sort of stuff happened. And they were only the sort of, I went to holidays, soccer camps at York College, and all of the guests were always from York City, and the prizes were sort of signed by York City players. And I've got a signed one by John McCarthy, who was like a real star of the early 90s York teams. I still remember making sort of a triple save in front of Dean Kiley, who was the York goalkeeper at the time, because he was there to pick up his son, and sort of those interactions with your local football club are things I didn't get by being a Wednesday fan, because I didn't live in Sheffield. That York was a very important part of my life, and very sort of important part of sort of a different side of football. And it was also a really exciting time to watch York City. So they'd been promoted to Division 2 in 1993. They beat Crewe in a playoff final. And that was the season they were wearing this sort of blue away kit. And they had quite a nice, simple red home kit. I liked the blue because obviously I was a Wednesday fan. I prefer blue to red. So I liked that they had a blue away shirt. So that's why this is my favorite one. And in many ways, there are, again, arguably more sort of interesting York City kits to choose. There's the famous Y front ones. Admiral did some really interesting designs a few years after this one that I'm talking about, and there was a sort of an infamous John Batchelor era sort of checkered flag arm where he was starting a racing company. John Batchelor of the Batchelor's Cup of Soups briefly owned York City, and it was chaotic. And sort of York City's trajectory has been very similar to Sheffield Wednesday's. Actually, they sort of peaked in the early 90s and been downhill and sort of slightly chaotic ever since. But to get back to this specific shirt, as I say, it's the first one I got after moving to York from Sheffield, and it's it's quite a nice, I don't really know what you'd call it. There's a sort of a chevron design in the background, but it's sort of mostly blue. Very simple as you'd expect from a company like Porter Cabin, a very simple logo which suits a Porter Cabin, I think, which is nice. Don't need anything too fancy. And it's very classic York City badge. They've since changed their badge. I prefer this one. It's much more in keeping with the sort of city's coat of arms, I think.
Yeah.
This badge, and as you say, it was made by Cavendish Sports, who I did a bit of research before coming onto this, which is always a good thing to do. And I as far as I can tell, they made Accrington's shirts around the same time, and also a Blackpool shirt, but I can't see what else they made. And a quick Google suggests they just make general sort of team wear these days.
Right.
I really don't know the story. I was far too young to really know who Cavendish were, and I can't find much information about them now. So I think they were sort of a more general sportswear manufacturer. But I really like this shirt. It's got a collar again. As I say, I quite like collars. It's a white collar and sort of button up collar as well. And it is quite a nice design. But as I say, I mostly liked it because it was their blue away kit, and I didn't want to wear red at that point. So I have sort of got over that now. But they also, as I say, this was a very exciting time to watch York. They were in Division 2. They'd got really exciting players. John McCarthy, and of course Paul Barnes was sort of the top scorer and the hero of Bootham Crescent.
Right.
Dean Kiley, who went on to sort of bigger things with Charlton.
Yeah.
And some others. A few years later, they famously beat Manchester United in the League Cup. They beat them 3-0 at Old Trafford, wearing another blue away shirt, actually, although slightly different. I prefer this one.
Right.
This sort of 92-93 one, but blue is quite a common away shirt for York. And then the following season they beat Everton again in the League Cup. So
wow,
a couple of really big moments. And as I say, it just kind of represents a different kind of going to football for me. A much more sort of social thing with friends and families and their families and my own family, rather than just me and my dad going sort of solo to Hillsborough every week, which I loved, but it is sort of it's nice to have different experiences.
Definitely, yeah.
York remain very important to me, although I'm not particularly pleased that they've left Bootham Crescent. I'll miss that a lot.
Yeah, different experience altogether. So, Tom, for your third and final choice, we're moving out of English football and we're going across to the other side of the world. We're going to 1996. This is a Gamba Osaka home shirt by Adidas. Tell me more.
Yeah, so when I don't, I'm sure I'm not the only person who does this, but when I go on holiday, I always like to pick a local team that I then sort of follow. I feel like I've got a connection to. So when I was sort of a teenager, I went to Athens and I picked up a Panathinaikos shirt because I got it. It's actually a fake shirt, it turns out, but a fake Panathinaikos one. But I didn't like the red and white of Olympiakos. Yeah. So in my mind, I now sort of follow Panathinaikos would be my team in Athens, sort of just because of that nebulous link to them. So I went to Japan in January 2020, just before, it was sort of the last trip before a global pandemic took hold properly.
Right.
And we went to, my partner and I we went to Tokyo and Kyoto and Osaka. And I remembered sort of in the back of my mind, an article that had been written by Adam Hurrey, who Football Cliches fame on Twitter, for Shortlist a few years ago. Quite a few years ago now, I think it was written. But it was about a shop called Vintage Sports Football.
I follow them on Instagram. They're fantastic, aren't they?
Yeah, it's brilliant. And they sell obviously classic shirts from around the world, but it's a good place to get sort of J-League shirts as well. And I checked, and it was nearby where we were in Osaka. So I sort of dragged my girlfriend along, and she ended up with a Sanfrecce Hiroshima shirt.
Nice.
Really nice one. But we were in Osaka at the time, so I sort of, and sorry if I get the pronunciation of this wrong, but I sort of faced a choice between Cerezo Osaka, I think it's Cerezo, because I think it's an Italian word, or Gamba Osaka. And as I've mentioned, sort of Gamba are the blue and Cerezo wear pink, but I tend to go for the blue team in a city or in a rivalry. And I just couldn't resist. I saw this shirt on display and I just couldn't resist it, because it's sort of a 1996 Adidas kit with sort of black and yellow lightning bolts coming down from the shoulders into the center of the chest, and there's an illustrated sort of Zeus kind of, I'm not sure it's quite anime, but sort of that style of sort of illustration. Sort of holding a lightning bolt with his foot on the football, and that seems to have been Gamba Osaka's badge early on in the J League, although again they've since changed it.
Right.
So I'm definitely not an expert on Japanese football, but sort of the J League was founded in 1992 with professional clubs. Before that, the leagues were amateur, and there are just some wonderful shirts from the sort of the early years of the J League, like Verdi Kawasaki had like this amazing green sunburst one, which is worth a look as well. But this one was on sale, and I just immediately was drawn to it because it's the blue side of a rivalry. And Gamba now are probably one of the bigger clubs in the J League. They've won the AFC, the Champions League in 2008.
Oh, wow.
I think they've won the title twice, and they've won a few cups. But they really weren't a force early on, so they only finished 12th out of 16 in this season. But that kind of doesn't matter to me. I'm not choosing one to follow the most successful team. I'm choosing one I've got a connection with. And this is also the shirt. The version I've got that I managed to buy is a long sleeved shirt, which is very rare. I don't think I own any other long sleeved football shirts. So sort of a bit different, but it's so striking. As a design, it's got a very simple Panasonic sponsorship, not too different from Porter Cabin on Yorkshire, and it's got sort of the word Adidas, no logo, but the word Adidas just under the collar. I just was immediately drawn to it. On a rack of hundreds of football shirts, it really stood out to me. I guess Gamba Osaka are now the Japanese club that I would follow. If I was ever asked which Japanese football club I supported, it would be Gamba. And it helped that the guy behind the counter was a Gamba fan as well. So we had a sort of long, very broken English chat about Gamba Osaka and sort of how much he loved them, which was a lot. He was a really nice guy. Unfortunately, I think their shop in Osaka, I was having a look, and it seems to have closed down.
Oh, you're kidding.
But they do have 3 shops in Tokyo by the looks of it. So if you are ever in Tokyo, it is worth it, because it's not, obviously they have shirts from around the world, but you can probably pick up, like European club shirts wherever you are in this country or around Europe. That's fine. But the joy for me is sort of the early J League shirts, and for some people, I'm sure they're gruesome designs that they're really not to people's tastes. People who want really clean classic shirts, it's not for you. Like, they are a bit mad, but I really like them. At least it's something a bit different, and you really stand out.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's where that one came from.
Nice, I love it. I one day hopefully get to go there as well. I do follow those.
Yeah, I warn you. It can really hurt your credit card when you go there, because you just want one of everything. Really, it is one of those places, and because you're in you're excited and you're on holiday, you think, just one more football shirt. How can it help? How can it hurt?
Just ignore the conversion rate, and
Yeah, exactly. Oh, how much can it be? Just put it on the credit card, and you get back and realise, but it's too late by then. You can't take it back. So, yeah.
So Tom, that's 3 absolutely amazing choices. Thank you so much. So obviously, subscribe to the magazine, keep the magazine going. Also, look out for kind of the podcast and also future live events too.
Yeah, definitely. So you can everything is at wsc.co.uk, or you can follow us on Twitter or Instagram at WSC Magazine. And just keep up to date. We've always got sort of new projects coming along. So if you want a bit of sort of alternative football writing and a bit of a slow down on the sort of constant rolling news and read about sort of a variety of football, then hopefully we're the magazine for you.
Lovely stuff, Tom. Well, look, thanks so much for your time, mate. I really enjoyed that.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
So there you have it. Massive thanks to Tom for sharing his football kit memories with me. You can follow me and my own collection on Instagram, or get in touch via Twitter or email. Make sure you follow when Saturday comes on all the socials, as well as subscribe to their podcast, which is great. The music you heard was produced by Evilid. You can check that out on his Bandcamp. There's links to absolutely everything I mentioned in the notes section too. And finally, thanks to you for listening. If you have enjoyed it, please do spread the word, give me a follow on social and subscribe to Football Kit Memories on your podcast player of choice. Other than that, I'll catch you next time.